Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel, welcome back to the van build. Coming at you from inside the van. Actually right now I figured why not actually film it inside the van that I built out. And this video is about how I insulated the van. If you're new to the channel or the van build, I just want you to know that I am a normal, everyday average Joe just trying to build who just built his van out with just the resources at his fingertips, which would be YouTube and online forums. I did all this on my own and I wanted to document the whole series to bring it to YouTube. So maybe you, if you are looking to build out your own van and know absolutely nothing about it, I was in your shoes and I'm just trying to help you with that process. And this episode is gonna be a little strange. Let me explain. So at the time I filmed this episode, the lens that I used for my camera, my 16-35, broke and I had to send it into the shop to get fixed. I didn't want that to stop production of building out the van, and I didn't want to not film it, so I filmed everything on my phone. So I apologize in advance for the terrible quality that most of this video is in. The other caveat to the video was I thought I had a handle on what I was gonna do for the installation, and I ended up pivoting halfway through. For those of you that don't know, I am a project manager at a roofing company, so insulation is something we kind of know a thing or two about. Treated the inside of this van much like we do our roof systems, and at my job we have polyISO, rigid polyISO that has a really high R value, and we have a lot of scrap pieces that I had been collecting to use for the van. I didn't think about it, but after I had framed up all of my furring strips, it was impossible to get any kind of insulation inside of it because it's just so rigid. So having to pivot, I ended up just going with regular batten insulation, which I feel was a good option. But that is the disclaimer, so hit the subscribe button so you can follow the van build, or if you like photography / adventuring, that is what I do now in this van so much, and I love it so much. Put a video out every single week, so subscribe if that interests you as well. So where I started in the van was insulating the ceiling, and this is actually problematic. This van likes to condensate a lot. I noticed when I first bought it and I gutted the whole thing out. On humid mornings or dewy mornings or at nighttime, I would come out here and I would see water droplets everywhere in uniform throughout the entire ceiling of the van, and that really worried me because a lot of condensation was coming through. Me working for a roofing company, I know that vapor retarders only block a certain amount of actual vapor coming through the wall of your substrate. Vapor retarders also make it hard for water that has been introduced in the system to get out because it has a lot more to work through to get out. So my solution to the water that was inevitably going to be condensating inside the van on the ceiling was to use an EPS foil face RTEC 1/2" RTEC insulation. Same insulation I did when I did the subfloor. EPS insulation rejects water, it doesn't absorb it. So my thought process was to loose lay the 1/2" RTEC on top, the foil face on top. If and when it condensates, the water would come down, fall on top of the insulation. I would have an air gap barrier of about a 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch that is vented through the back. So when the water inevitably does come through, vapor barrier or not, it would be there, fall on the non-absorbing EPS insulation, and then eventually air itself out. Under that 1/2" EPS insulation, I put the polyISO rigid insulation, which has a higher R value than EPS. And again, my whole thought process behind having the EPS insulation on top would be better to have something that is water resistant, sitting from the condensation falling onto the ceiling, versus just having the insulation which absorbs water like a sponge and having that water inevitably come through and resting on that insulation creating mold. That is my thought process behind it. I'm not an expert. I am not an expert. This is just me and my job, knowing roofing, knowing insulation. So that is the reason why I did that. All right, to kind of start us off, we are going to just be putting piece by piece of that EPS fan fold in between each piece. This part is going to be a little difficult, as you can see, because the wires are here. I'm not worried again about getting it completely against the ceiling, because again, the ceiling condensates, condensation happens, water is going to be coming through here. So I want a gap in between the ceiling and the EPS for the water to actually drop and rest on, because that's just going to happen. That's just a thing. So the plan is with that is back here, it'll have air venting in between the whole roof and EPS system. This is going to be loose laid, air floating the whole way. The wires help give me that gap. And then I'm going to be putting polyISO rigid insulation on this to add the R value. And honestly, the only thing I'm using to hold this up is just tape, but this is the system I'm going with. I'm gonna continue installing all these. Now, obviously, this is not going to be an airtight insulated system, so I wasn't really worried about holes or gaps in anything. So for the wires that were coming down for the LED lights, all I did was just cut some holes in those and then pop that sucker up, and it held up pretty good once I put some tape on it. it's actually going super quick. So I saved the best for last, which is just this piece with this giant fan in the middle, which sucks, but I'm going to put one piece here, another separate piece here, and probably a thin piece just below that, just to cover up that gap. Same up front right here. Sorry, this camera angle's terrible. And that kind of covers it for the ceiling with the R-Tech. Yeah, let's get this last part in. For my bed cutouts here, not a lot to work with. In fact, this was actually something that I was really nervous about because I wanted to get something behind there. So I ended up just putting the R-Tech half-inch insulation behind there too. It was literally perfect. The half an inch is all I had to work with the nailers that I had to install the shiplap to. So I put the half-inch EPS insulation as the only insulation on these bed cutouts. Something is better than nothing, at least that's my thought process behind it. And I think that's it for the R-Tech, really. I mean, we just got a line down the ceiling. We got the bed cutouts where the shiplap's gonna go in on each side. I forgot to mention that farthest side over there, that's gonna be an actual splash wall. I don't know why. I didn't know what I was doing when I was building the framing. I wish I went all the way up with the framing because I'm actually gonna put a piece of plywood there to hold the backsplash. It's gonna go there with the kitchen counter. That I'll actually insulate all the way out. It'll be super thick insulation there, and that's awesome. Yeah, I think I'm ready to bring it to the shop tomorrow and wrap this up. Be back at the shop. Like I mentioned, I work for a roofing company. I have been having my coworkers store this giant pile of insulation for me, scrap insulation that I was gonna use for the van. I feel really bad because they held on to it for months and I only used probably 2 or 3 pieces. I know not everybody has access to insulation like this. This is just what I did to insulate my van because, again, it was resources I had at my fingertips. If you're interested in doing something like this, maybe just research in your local area how much polyISO is or whoever manufactures it in your area and do a cost difference between which one you might want to use. I can say for the very short amount of time I've been using this van, when I heat it up, it does stay warm for quite a while. In fact, sometimes when I'm sleeping at night, I'll have the heater go on and I will turn it off and it stays good pretty much throughout the night. I'm very impressed by how well this van does holding heat in. Same system with the polyISO though. I just used a screw to kind of like round out a hole for the LED light wires and just shoved it right up there, and I used duct tape to hold it in. Again, all the insulation is loose laid, meaning it's just hanging out up there. When I put the ceiling in, the insulation then rested on it, creating that gap I was talking about at the beginning of the video from the ceiling to the EPS to allow airflow to eventually dry out any condensation that happens in there. So that was an absolute pain in the ass. Oh my God. Yeah, the ISO is a little bit heavier than I thought, and honestly, I think 1.5 inches is actually gonna be too thick. I went ahead and did it on this one because I know I pushed it up. I definitely still have some play in it. I think I'm just gonna go 1 inch for the rest of the way out, which I don't know what the R value is. I'll put it down here, but it's still pretty high for just having 1 inch plus the 1/2 inch and R value from the EPS. So I'm gonna start finding 1 inch boards and start cutting those out. I did want to use polyISO on 2 things, the backsplash area and the doors. Those are huge cavities and I didn't want to have to fill those up with batten insulation that's not really meant to be compressed. So I ended up having to modify the furring strips there and just take them out, and then I was able to finally get the polyISO inside the cavity behind the backsplash, which is like 3 inches. I wish I just left those furring strips out, then put them in. Yeah. I ended up having to take out these 2 boards to fit these inside there because of all the boards. Like it's impossible to fit. This stuff is so hard and rigid and there's no flex to it. So I had to take this off, filled that cavity in. So now the ceiling is done and I got my backsplash covered. It was time to actually insulate the walls. I won't show any footage of it, but I actually did cut a couple pieces of polyISO and tried shoving them in between the furring strips. It was a complete disaster. At this point, I'm freaking out because I'm like, I need to insulate this fan. What do I use? But honestly, like, batten insulation that you use inside your house just kind of made sense to me just to use that. So I went and bought 1 giant pack of R21 insulation. I literally just rolled it out across the floor and it worked out kind of perfectly of me cutting them in half and then cutting it into sections and just shoving it in the wall cavities throughout the entire van. this is gonna look with the shiplap, because as you can see, this bulges out here and it gets weird from the wall, it gets wonky, so something funky is gonna have to happen here. I don't want to insulate yet because I don't know what's gonna happen. The shiplap's gonna have to come across somehow. I kind of threw this block in here thinking maybe it'll help. So I'm just gonna leave it blank for now for insulation purposes. And I got just enough insulation left over that if I need to shove some in there or even put some fan fold in there, I should be fine. Once I completed shoving insulation into all the walls, it was time to move on to the last piece of insulation, which is the 2 back doors. And just like the backsplash, there were 2 huge cavities that I needed to fill with. Worked out perfectly to use the polyISO. I ended up measuring the actual size of the cavities to the polyISO and then just kind of shaved around it and made curves from there. Once I test fit it and found out that it worked, I literally just put it on the polyISO and just made another one because they are both identical. That was it for the top pieces. The hard part was the bottom pieces because there's a lot of stuff in there, wiring and all that, and I didn't want to compress it with rigid foam insulation or like having it butt up right against it. So I just used the RTEC and some really thin polyISO, like roughly 1 inch thick, and just kind of shoved it in there to give it some more insulation. It wasn't the greatest, but I mean, I guess I could have shoved some batten insulation in there. But honestly, you're not really supposed to compress batten insulation. You're really just supposed to let it be what it is where it lies. And that's basically it. That's how I insulated my van. I don't know if it's the most conventional way. I don't even know if it's the smartest way. It is the way I did it. It made sense to me. And again, I can confirm that this van is pretty well insulated. When it's cold out, it stays warm in here for pretty extended periods of time. I do have 3 giant windows in the van, and those do not help me whatsoever, but for what I have in the walls, insulation, and ceiling, I feel like it does a pretty good job. That brings us to the end. I know it's not an exciting video, it's just insulating your van. It's nothing great, but it's the next step in the van series. Next week's video is gonna be about how I installed the cedar ceiling and how I wired up the lights, and was a really pivotal point for me in the van build because it was finally showing the finished look of what my van was gonna look like, and I was very, very excited because seeing the aesthetics of the ceiling alone just really gave my drive an extra kick that it needed. So thank you so much for watching. Again, I know it's not the most exciting video, but it was a necessary step. If you yourself are looking to build your own van, you know nothing about it like I did, hit the subscribe button. I put a video out every single week, and I'm covering the entire van build from start to finish. And if someone like me who knew literally nothing about any of this stuff did it, I know you can too. If you have any questions about the installation or anything else in the van, go ahead and leave in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in next week's video. Bye.